Ian's really kindly introduced me, so I don't need to go through an awful lot of this stuff, but I write for all of these different places. I appear on TV and radio and do all sorts of things, including trying to explain tech to the world, which can be quite difficult to do because often it's inscrutable, it's difficult to understand, and the personalities who are involved in it can often be quite unpleasant as well. But hopefully will be a little bit interesting, thanks to the role that I have at the university as well of being a lecturer. So I kind of wanted to divide the talk that we're going to do into three sections, and one is looking at AI in journalism generally to try and set the stage and give us a little bit of insight into what is going on and why it's important that we're talking about this right now. Then to try and give you an oversight in how I use it, and there's two broad ways that I use it. One is using AI chatbots, which is the kind of first generation of generative AI. So aware that we'll have different levels of expertise and knowledge on the call, so forgive me if I'm telling you what you already know, but generative AI generally defined as the creation of new content, the generation of it, using artificial intelligence tools based on usually a prompt. So we're talking here about you stick some text into the likes of ChatGPT, you ask it to do something, it answers the question with a generation that it has produced. So that's generative AI. And then there is the other aspect in which I'm starting to dabble and find really interesting and really useful and a bit of a time hack, which is in agentic AI, which is rather than asking an AI to give you an output, usually in text or in video or in images, instead to actually ask it a question and get it to do stuff and to tinker around in the real world somewhat. The real digital world, but the real world nonetheless. So we're going to go through that, and then I'll leave plenty of time at the end for Q&As, because I imagine in a community like the Civic Journalism Lab, we're journalists or journalist adjacent or sometimes journalist curious, and so we invite good questions and lots of them as well. So just to briefly give you a whistle-stop history of kind of where AI is in journalism. I'm not going to go back 70 years to the invention, the conception of AI as a term, although it is really interesting, celebrating its 70th anniversary this year. The term invented in 1956 by a bunch of different researchers who came together under one roof at Dartmouth College in the United States to try and give a branding, a name, an umbrella term to all of these different things that they were working on. For journalism, I guess the use of AI in a sort of mainstream sense has been much more recent in the last decade or so. So the middle of the 2010s, right about the time that I was starting to kind of bed into journalism proper, and we were seeing the first wave of digital journalism platforms either pivoting to video and then finding that there was a big issue, or just embracing social media as a kind of mechanism for and distribution platform to share stories. We saw places like the AP, the Associated Press, starting to work with AI companies that generally would use the two words that stand for AI in different ways. In this case, Automated Insights, which was a technology provider, to see whether or not it could automate parts of our job. And generally, it wasn't that good, to be honest. It had to rely on structured data. That's in part because of the way in which those AI systems operated at the time. This was before the 2017 paper called Attention is All You Need, that basically unlocked the ChatGPT revolution. That the T in ChatGPT is transformers. That is, not to get too technical, but like a kind of underpinning technology that allows the things that we can do now to actually take place. So they were instead using structured data, effectively saying, here is the broad bones of our story that we would usually write on college sports or financial earnings. This company announced their results today. They had an X% increase/decrease in their revenue and a Y% increase or decrease in their profit. That is a Z% change overall. That sort of thing where you just literally strip out the information and slot it in to a sort of preordained, pre-written script. And it worked okay, but not brilliant, not the most interesting journalism, not the best finished product. And so people found it pretty meh. In 2018, the AP, they started to expand that a little bit. Rather than just the college stuff, the NCAA, they began to do minor league sports and lots of other sports that generally hadn't previously been covered. Then in the late 2010s and the early 2020s, yeah, Stephen, you've got your hand up. So if you just drop a question into the chat or the Q&A, we can collate those at the end. So fear not about that. I'll do a little bit of housekeeping for those who came late. Late 2010s, early 2020s, we started to see AI adoption in slightly different ways. So I use Otter all the time. I know a lot of people use Otter sort of day in, day out as journalists. I can't actually remember what I did before Otter. I was much slower. But that is also an AI tool. That is kind of voice recognition, transcription based on lots of training data, and then outputting into a format, a transcription that we can use relatively easily. So it's not like AI has never been here, but in 2022, I think the release of ChatGPT changed things somewhat, as it has for all of the world. So 800 million people every single week use ChatGPT, around 600 or 700 million more use Google Gemini, a kind of Google's competitor to this sort of thing. And with that, we are also starting to see people in our industry adopting this. So there was a really interesting analysis by the Reuters Institute. Again, whenever you're looking at interesting analyses, it is generally by the Reuters Institute, showing that around several dozen organizations, people are starting to test this use of AI in various different places, always with human oversight, always being skeptical because we are journalists, but recognizing that there are opportunities here perhaps to either automate or to improve on some of the systems and the ways that we operate in the past. The EBU, the European Broadcasting Union, then put out a really interesting study/report last year, which basically showed that European newsrooms are doing similar pilots. And we have, I guess, in the chat, in the viewers here, the listeners, the people who are probably in some of those newsrooms. And so I'd love to maybe in the Q&A session also hear from you in terms of what you are doing. The use of AI there generally was around kind of summarizing news, searching through archives, while also avoiding actually that A to Z process of using AI for entire story generation. So slightly different, I suppose, to what we saw 10 years ago with those early AP pilots. And I'm very much of the belief that that should be how we use AI. Not through the whole process. We still need to be journalists. We still need to be reporters. But this technology exists, so we should use it in some way. So that's the whistle stop tour, and that leads us on, I guess, to where we are in 2026, and I guess particularly just the last 3 years that are building up the momentum that we're seeing now. So in 2024, we started to see a lot of new models coming out, AI coding tools beginning to go mainstream, and also the layering in of image and video generation to AI coding and the use of tools as well. So there we started to see this not just operating in newsrooms, but across various different enterprises, pilot schemes of using AI in some way, shape, or form starting to take shape. 2025 felt like a bit of an inflection year as someone covering the AI space, covering tech more generally, and also as a user of it. So we started to really see what are called reasoning models, the idea of being able to replicate in some way, but not entirely, formats of how we are thinking as humans in silico becoming really, really powerful. So we had reasoning models, ChatGPT's 01, 03. We had DeepSeek, which was January 2025's biggest moment, upending everything. And then GPT 5.2, which is the current generation of OpenAI's models, and competitor called Opus 4.5. That we're actually expecting perhaps a new release literally today or tomorrow from Anthropic, which is the makers of the Claude chatbot. So if you're a Northumbria University lecturer or staff member here, you have access to that. I'm a little bit jealous because it means that you can kind of use it and try it and play with it. So anybody at Newcastle University IT department listening, let's get access to that. And at the same time, we're starting to see agentic AI becoming a thing. and spending rising commensurately. So Menlo Ventures, venture capital firm, tracking the spending on AI in this sort of space, 3.2 times increase year on year on this stuff. And that was 2025. Okay. 2026, things have really upended. Everybody went home for Christmas, started tinkering around with AI tools, including one called Claude Code, which is really quite cool. Basically, it links into your computer the files that you have on it and allows you to subjugate tasks autonomously to that AI to be conducted while you're asleep, while you're on the train, while you're doing something else, and come back with some results. Might not be perfect, but they are perhaps better than nothing. And that was a huge change. And then in the last couple of weeks, we've seen a weirdly shape-shifting renaming product that was initially called Claudebot, then became called Maltbot, and now is called OpenClaw, which some people suggest is kind of like the general user use case of these sorts of things, of agentic AI, because rather than having to go into what's called the terminal, which is kind of like the way that your computer can be controlled in a very kind of difficult, non-user friendly way, you can just chat with an AI bot through WhatsApp or Telegram or Discord or Slack, and it will do the tasks for you. So the idea now is you can just set it and forget it when it comes to AI. You can start a day by saying, hey, OpenClaw or Claude Code, can you just go and do this for me? Leave it and come back, and something will have been completed. And that, I think, has massive impacts on potential productivity. And I'm seeing that already with the ability to have a personal assistant in your pocket. Claude Code is really difficult. There's kind of an in-between. So OpenClaw has its issues, which we'll get onto in a little bit. Claude Code is very complicated for the average user. Ironically, Anthropic, the company behind this, released a thing called Claude Cowork, which is an in-betweeny one. It's more graphical user interface. It's user-friendly. The whole thing, by the way, was developed autonomously by AI agents. So Anthropic set Claude Code off to create a more user-friendly version of this tool, and it did it, which is kind of scary in its own way. So if we compare this kind of yesterday's AI, and by that I mean 2022 to 2025, journalism moves quickly, and we often think of today's news being tomorrow's chip paper. Well, yesterday's AI was kind of you answer questions when you demand AI to do so. It can generate text, it can generate images, it can generate video, but it always required constant prompting. You had to chivvy along the AI to do things. That's changed with today's AI and the advent of agentic AI, particularly Claude Code and Claude Bot and those sorts of things. It can plan and execute multi-step tasks without you having to really see anything and check on it all that much. It can also link into a whole ecosystem of external tools and services, and it just works autonomously towards achieving the goals that you set it, which is both exciting and also a little bit scary, not least given things like Tim's question about concerns of kind of autonomy, security, and things like that. So really, we are in this moment of Claude Code, and this is what it looks like. It's kind of very much you feel like a hacker using it because it's within your kind of depths of your computer. But at the same time, we have this cute little mascot as well, which is the Claudebot / OpenClaw tool that has kind of brought this to the masses. So that's our kind of canter through the backdrop and the background of what is going on here. In terms of my day-to-day AI use, well, as I said, there are two main approaches. Okay, so I'll either use AI chatbots or what we call answer engines. They are the AI equivalent of search engines. So ChatGPT is kind of a kind of iconic AI chatbot. It's what people would say is my daily driver. It's the one that I use often. And then you have tools like Perplexity, which is kind of like Google, but with a little bit of AI layered in. So you can ask it questions in a conversation. It provides sources. You do always have to check them, but it can be really useful. The general process behind that, as we have here on the slides, is you ask a prompt, you maybe give it some context, it gives you an answer, and then you feed that answer into your reporting process with a little bit of work. So it produces text, you read that text, you then think about, okay, What can I do with that? How do I integrate the findings of that into the stories that I'm writing? The agentic AI, which is the second plank of AI use that I have, things like Claude Code, that's very different. That's a free-form query. It's often just a brain dump of, hey, I had this idea that this thing might be cool for my day-to-day use. Can you do something about it? And it goes away and it produces and completes the task. Then I use the output of that task in the reporting process that I have, or I integrate the output of that task into my daily routines. And to try and visualize that or show you that, I'm going to give you various ways of thinking about it. Okay, so broadly, if you asked me with a gun to my head, what do I do as a journalist in my workflow? I would suggest it's this. I have to try and consume all of the information that happens on my beat in my area from a fire hose of information. Competitors, competing publications, official feeds, um, social media feeds, gossip, sources, all of the above. It's just constantly coming in. And our jobs as journalists, I think, is to try and pick out the signal from the noise, to think what is important, what is relevant, and then utilize that in a way that can be vital to our audience. So I make those editorial judgments on the information and decide what stories I'm going to cover. Then I go into the research and reporting process, speaking to people, doing desk-based research, finding out what's important, synthesizing that information, and then producing the stories at the end of it. Now, the stories here are usually text, but they can be audio and video. Increasingly, we're being asked to be multimedia journalists. In terms of where AI fits into that workflow, it's really in two key areas. Okay, so it's in helping me out with the information gathering from the fire hose, because I'm only one person, and particularly as a freelancer, I can only read so many things unless it dominates my day, and I need to get on with other stuff. So this can help me there, and also in the researching elements of the stories. So finding out information, trying to find potential interviewees as one part of my process. Those are where I think AI can usefully fit into my workflow. Now, the one thing that you'll notice from that, and the one thing that I hope that you'll take away from this, is that I'm pro AI. I think that it's useful, but I don't think that it's useful without any sort of caveats. Okay, the human very much, not least because we are in the process and the industry that requires us to be honest brokers, to be truthful, to be factual, to be evidential. The human is very much in the loop throughout this whole process, and very much at the times where it's really vital in the reporting process to not be making stuff up, to not be introducing errors, to not be assuming things that are incorrect and ending up being very much embarrassed by making those incorrect assumptions. So AI tools, I think, can support but not supplant the journalist, and nor can they really supplant ethical human reporting. And that's really vital to me. So two key takeaways. That's why I put them on the big colorful slides. I thought that's important. Imagine this is my TED talk. These are the things that I would be standing astride the stage going, look, this is the point I'm trying to hammer home. But you might be thinking of like, how do you actually use this properly? This is why you signed up to listen to a talk and you've logged on and wanted to learn about this sort of stuff. So if I give you a couple of examples, well, one is that chatbot process, so the ChatGPT style process. Let's say I'm reporting out a story on a particular subject. It's flying cars in this instance. In a pre-AI world, what I would have done is I would have spent 20 minutes, 30 minutes, maybe a bit longer, Googling around on social media as well, trying to find flying car experts and then their contact details. Like that's what we do. All looking at my phone book, ringing around, asking people, do they know anybody who is a flying car expert? Took me time. Okay. I can do that quicker with the help of AI. And it's with the help of, not in place of. Okay, that's the really important thing. So I have a prompt that I can put into ChatGPT, or I can put it into, frankly, any LLM, large language model. This is the kind of technology that underpins the chatbots like OpenAI's ChatGPT, or Anthropic's Claude, or Google's Gemini. And I can say, find me potential sources on flying cars. Give me their affiliations, explain to me why they might be useful for my story, because here's the story I'm writing, and see if you can find their contact details from publicly available information. I won't do that solely as a way of finding sources, by the way. This is always a thing. Okay, it's alongside human stuff. So I'll set it away while I try and find the really, really good contacts. And I'll use it as a, can you find me anybody new that I haven't thought of, or anybody that is relevant in this space? So it's running alongside my process. The other one is the agentic process. And I'll be completely honest, I'm very excited about this sort of thing at the minute. So forgive me if I kind of get over the top on this, but I think this is really kind of a game changer for me. I used to spend a bloody long time every single day, and still do, truthfully, trying to consume all of the journalism on my beat. There are a lot of really good reporters in the space. I want to read all of their stuff. There just isn't time if I also want to report out my own stories. So previously what I've done is I would have at least spent the first hour of my day, basically from every waking hour that I have, trying to find relevant stories for me. So I'd pass through RSS feeds. I'd look at my emails. I'd look at different websites, news stories on those websites. And what I would do is I would just skim through them and try and identify what's important, what's relevant to me, what I think are going to be the stories that are driving the day, the news agenda. Now what I do is I've used Claude Code to basically pass through 2,000 stories that I've written, because I have all the Word documents of the stories that I've written. I said, look at these, learn about what I'm interested in, learn about what sorts of stories I tell, and what I might be trying to pick out of that massive stream of content every single day. Then I gave it 50 RSS feeds, and I said, look at that while I sleep, pull out the stories that I would be interested in, and then summarize them using an LLM, a large language model, and email me a digest of that. When I wake up, I just have to look at that. And that works so far. That's brilliant for me. Again, it's not the only source of information I'll use, but it's basically the equivalent of me having to skim through lots of different websites and different feeds. So it's an ingestion supplanting tool, effectively. Another process that I use, which is a chatbot process at the minute, but I'm probably going to move it to be an agentic one, is that I get 200 to 300 emails every single day. The reason why I know that, by the way, is that I got AI to count the number of emails that I have and how many I get in. Finding the ones that are useful to me, which is generally editors trying to commission me or some useful PR pitches, is really, really difficult. And so previously what I do is I have my Gmail tab open on my browser, and every time I have a habit, I just go Control and 1. So whenever I have Chrome open, if I'm not doing anything, if I'm inactive, it's Control and 1 to look at that tab, to scroll through my emails. It's why people tend to commission me and why I'm seen as a dependable freelancer, is because I spend an unhealthy amount of time in my inbox replying to emails within minutes. Now what I do is I use a Gemini prompt, because that's connected to my Gmail by default, because Google is trying to do all of this, and we can absolutely discuss the ethics and the concerns about that in a little bit. But I connect it to my Gmail because it's already there, and I say, read through what I've received in the last 24 hours and give me a summary. Like, give me a newsletter summary of the newsletters that I've received. Give me the bullet points of who's emailed me, pitching me what, or asking me to do what. What is my to-do list? And so again, I read into that first thing in the morning, and it saves me an awful lot of time. So that's how I use AI in various different ways at the minute. And just to kind of also get a little bit more detailed for you, to show you a kind of average day for me, which again, no day is average as a journalist. Every day is different. But I think it might be useful to show you the sort of hour by hour, minute by minute interactions that I have with AI and the process that I go through as a journalist. And if your process as a journalist is very different to this, I want to hear about it, because as a freelancer, as someone who interacts with my journalism community in Newcastle, I speak to Ian, I speak to Jim, I speak to maybe Sarah and a few other people around Newcastle University who are journalists or who have been journalists or who are a little bit of both at the same time. And I learn about how they do things, but you might be doing things drastically different to me, and in which case I want to learn from you. So we established first thing in the morning, I use AI to ingest all of that stuff and to produce an output of what I need to pay attention to on my beat. Then what I tend to do is I read into the day using that AI output. So here, the little robots, we're anthropomorphizing AI. I know that's an issue. I've written about that for New Scientists. We shouldn't be doing this. They're not human-like. It's very dangerous, but let's look at the cute robot. Humans here are the green dots. I read into the day from that AI output. Then I judge the stories of the day and I start pitching them to my editors. This is all a human process. Then if I get commissions, I'm lucky to do that or whatever, then I might start to be sourcing interviewee candidates with AI. And at the same time, I'll be using my human knowledge to do so. Then I'll be using humans taking over this process an awful lot. So I'm writing up stories, I'm calling people, I'm sending out interview requests, doing all of that at the same time as doing desk-based research. So I'll start to go into the world, try and understand what it is I need to know about this given story that I'm going to be focusing on today. At the same time, I'm going to ask AI to help me with that, to do a little bit of research, to get to Valerie's point about how do you know that the information is reliable. In terms of the emails, we can talk about that a little bit later, but actually in terms of the reliability of the sourcing, the research that it does, again, you have to check it always, but it does no harm to have a little assistant there doing some of that work for me alongside what I'm doing. That's why you need to have that validation of that AI desk-based research that is going on. Then the human starts to take over again. So the human's doing the interviews. The human is identifying the lines from the interviews. If, however, I did an interview for a story 2 weeks ago, and I write 500 odd stories a year, so frankly, I don't remember what I did yesterday, never mind what I did 2 weeks ago. If I have to dredge out of Otter an interview that I did 2 weeks ago, I will potentially use AI to try and identify some lines from those interviews to remind me what it's about. And then I will go in again as a human and go, okay, yeah, this was this story about this. This person gave me this broad idea that I think is worth pursuing. So let me look into the detail of the transcript and find and use my journalistic judgment to identify the key things from that story. Then I'm collating all the research and the interviews together so that I can write it up. Again, human, human, human in all of this process. I'm reading the story that I've written and giving it a little bit of an edit so that I don't do any embarrassing mistakes or typos to an editor, although no human is perfect. So in that case, why don't I ask the AI to try and help me with that? Second set of eyes can always be useful. AIs can be quite persnickety in terms of punctuation, in terms of grammar, and that sort of thing. So it can sometimes help with a little bit of an editing process. Oh, you missed out this concept. Oh, your commas are wrong. Your infinitive is split. Whatever it is, you can potentially use it as a bit of a sounding board in the same way that you would a colleague with a fresh set of eyes when you're pretty worn out and tired from reporting out this story. So with that in mind, I then might rewrite the story, adding some missing context or some stats or whatever it is that either I think are missing or the AI advisors might be helpful for me to try and include. Using AI and human skills to try and do that, although of course always validating the AI outputs. Then filing your story as a human, addressing the edits from your human editor, reading the latest news developments as a human, receiving future AI news alert updates. So we'll get onto it a little bit later on, but I have a WhatsApp bot that will send me every hour the top stories that I think I would be interested in. Again, tuned on my taste. It says, 40 minutes ago, it said that I should cover a story about Mistral. It said that I should cover a story about Alibaba Cloud. It's got all of these things appearing here that I can just kind of scroll through, but I'll show you that in a little bit more detail later on. So I'm getting those AI news alert updates, and that continues, frankly, until I crash out on the sofa late at night in front of some kind of rubbish YouTube channel, which is generally what my day is. It's not very exciting as a journalist. So that is my day. And the key thing I think to point out is the way that I'm using AI is as a reporting assistant, not a replacement. Really important that it is not a replacement. But what it does do is it allows me to move faster from ideas to research to interviews to drafts to edits, to get through that whole process quickly. The rules that I have are that I own the judgment, the editorial taste effectively, I own the sourcing, and I own the accuracy of it. Because particularly in a world where we're not trusted as journalists, of things that we have done as an industry or because of external forces trying to cast doubt on our industry, it's important that we have all of that. Having used AI for a little while now, it's very much strongest at kind of thinking about structure, thinking about giving you options, although those options are often just the collated smushing together of people's taste. So it is bland, but that's not necessarily a bad thing in journalism, where we're trying to attract the broadest audience possible. It's very good at speed. It's very good at doing checklists and trying to work through them. It's very much weakest at the thing that is most important to us, which is truth. And so you need to verify everything that comes out of this. And often it makes mistakes. Small mistakes, big mistakes, it makes them. So that is the kind of broad overview of what I do. And then I thought I would try to just drill down a little bit to what exactly it is that I go through in these various different processes that I have. So again, thinking about those two key planks of how I use AI as a journalist. One of those being the chatbots, the likes of ChatGPT, the likes of Gemini or whatever. And again, the kind of ground rules of that is that I'll be asking AI to do a task alongside me rather than in place of me. So the way of thinking about it really is, we have, I think, a few students on the call, and that's really great to hear. Like in an ideal world, as a freelancer, it's not possible for me, but in an ideal world, I would love to hire fresh journalism graduates and have them sit alongside me and get them to do some of the grunt work for me and then bring it back to me and go, okay, here's the interesting thing that I need to look at, and then be able to utilize that. I can't afford to do that, and I don't have the time to do that. Okay. A lot of news organizations do that. That's why we have internships. That's why we have junior reporter roles. That's why we have researcher roles, although I appreciate those are becoming fewer and farther between. But I've written stories for national newspaper features desks where you get a cut job from either the intern or the lowest ranking reporter or whoever saying, here's what we found on this particular topic from our archives and our competitors' archives that might be useful for your story. It's also amazing when that happens. It feels like manna from heaven. It just happens so rarely in journalism nowadays. But anyway, so what I'll do is I'll ask AI generally to do a task alongside me or while I'm doing something else. So it can be finding 15 all right potential interviewees while I look for the one or two ones that will really lead my story and carry it through to make it really resonant. In terms of kind of how I use AI, well, there are certain things that people need to know about AI, and particularly the large language models that underpin a lot of these things. And again, forgive me if you already know this, and I'm speaking to you as a peer who already is aware of this sort of stuff, but there will be some people on this call for whom AI is a relatively unknown quantity. Okay. AI has what's called a context window. And those context windows depend on the different models that are being used, and also, frankly, by the amount that you pay for those models to gain access to them. So the context window is effectively the sum total that an AI is able to hold within its knowledge. And I'm using knowledge here with big honking inverted quotation marks around it because AI doesn't inherently know anything, doesn't have a brain, doesn't have insight or sentience or consciousness or anything like that. But a context window depends drastically on the model. They've got bigger and better, but it's effectively the amount of well, exactly, Valerie, not quite yet. It hasn't got consciousness, but we can also get onto that in the Q&A session. The context window effectively is how much information it can hold in its memory, and I'm using memory here as the computer term, in one time. Okay, so for instance, Google models have a very big context window. They measure this, by the way, in tokens. Tokens are not the same as words. They're not the same as letters. They're generally like every 3 or 4 letters as a rule of thumb. Okay, so the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. I don't know how many words or letters that is, but it's probably maybe, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 tokens. Probably not even 20, actually, probably 7 to 10 tokens when it's like 10 to 15 words. Some other models have much smaller context windows, and the context windows can be input and output depending on the model. So if you ask a really convoluted, long question of a task for an AI to complete, you've used up a little bit of that context window. Okay. If you're asking it to pull through a 300-page PDF, which has several 100,000 words in it, maybe, then that is using up a lot of that context window, and performance degrades on these models. It starts to make things up, get things wrong, just do things incorrectly when that context window starts to get used up. So I always use different conversations for different tasks to prevent that context window exhausting, but also to prevent it polluting, because it can only really hold one thing in its mind at any one time. Again, mind being in inverted commas here. If I'm asking it to try and find sources for a story, I then don't want to try and ask it to do desk-based research on the same story, because it still has that pollution of the sources in there. But you can lump certain projects, certain similar tasks under what are called projects in chatbots to try and maintain some sort of consistency. Because you can actually do what's called RAG, which is retrieval augmented generation. This is, again, AI tech terminology, but it effectively means you can have specific instructions for certain tasks focused only in certain areas. So I can have a folder, a project, whatever you want to call it, which says it's interview sourcing. Yeah, so it's finding me potential sources to talk to. And I can say in that, here is the sort of way that I do it, and you follow that. And I can have a separate one which says, here is a research project. Here is my process for researching. You can follow that, and never the two shall meet. But the thing is, chatbots do get quote unquote tired. So you often do need to start afresh on the conversations. So I kind of have 8 broad areas in which I use chatbots, some much more than others, and some really not at all, I'll be completely honest. So the newsletter scanner I use an awful lot. Pitch filter, pitch recovery assistant, pitch respinner bot, not so much. Researcher, not so much. Source finder, I do use an awful lot. Fact checker, I hardly ever use. Interview summary, I do sometimes use, but not too much either. So there are lots of different ways I use it. And just to kind of show you a couple of these examples, because I think it's instructive. If you are chatbot curious and you're thinking, well, actually, I haven't put you off entirely, the idea of using AI, and maybe you want to think about how you can utilize it yourself or give it a go and see whether it's worthwhile for you, then this might be useful. So this is the prompt that I use for pulling through what's in my inbox, basically. Okay. So you have to first give the AI a role. These are kind of general rules of prompting, which are current best practice, although it's worth pointing out even AI researchers aren't certain exactly how these tools work. Okay, they're very much black boxes. And so this is our current understanding of what is useful, but that understanding can always change. So setting an idea of a role is seen as quite good because it gives them a persona to inhabit as a chatbot and to think about what do I need to actually achieve here. So you're an AI assistant specializing in rapid email analysis and news aggregation for journalists. Then you give it a task after you've given it a role. So your task is to sort through my emails for the last 12 hours. And you can go into detail there. Pull out all the emails out of newsletters in this instance. Read through them thoroughly. Analyze the content of them specifically from the perspective of a journalist looking to keep up to date. Focus on extracting the most important, the most newsworthy bits of it, any emerging trends, any potential investigative angles, and then give me an output. So role, task, details, output. What is the role you want it to inhabit? What is the task you want it to do? What are the details of that task? And then what do you want it to do after it has done that task? How do you want it to show you what it's done? So in this case, it's outputting those stories as a list of no more than 50 bullet points. For each one, show me where the sources come from. And so when you run this, and this is an old example that I'll show you, but it's a useful one nonetheless. This is the example that I had on November the 20th. Okay, so it bunched them into different bullet points. It actually gave me different themes, and it gave me the sources. So this was when NVIDIA had unleashed its latest results at the time, did pretty well. It gave me the source of that. So I had the Dealbook newsletter, I had the Rundown AI, I had the Tech Meme summary, and I had Business Insider as well. There was a US-Saudi agreement in terms of tech that was useful and interesting from an investment forum. Again, it gives me the sources of those emails so I can go back and check on this sort of stuff, and that makes it relevant. So really interesting question, Claire, about how AI makes assessments of newsworthiness, which again, I'll try and touch on a little bit in the Q&A, because actually there's, inherently, I think without steering, AI is pretty bad at this sort of thing. And that's not just us being smug journalists thinking that we're better than everybody else. A little bit it is actually, but that's by the by. We'll get onto that. The other one is the pitch filter. I use this one a lot. This is the PR pitches and the editor pitches, trying to distinguish and discern between those ones, which maybe might answer a little bit of Valerie's question, but again, we can discuss it in more detail in the Q&A. Here again, we have a task that I'm assigning it. So analyze my emails from the last 24 hours, and then an output. Give me this output. One section is pitches and summaries, so PR pitches that are coming into me, any interview opportunities, any events, any expert commentary things. Give me what the topic is, give me who the organization is, give me basically whether or not I need to care. Then the work-related updates. So where am I at in terms of the stories that I'm reporting on? Have I had any emails or contact from editors? Have I had any responses to interview requests? Things like that. Can you help me basically triage that level of email as well? And this is the broad output. In this case, I changed the time frame to 72 hours because I ran it on a Monday morning. So I wanted to capture anything that had come over in the weekend as well. And you can see I was doing at the time a story on quantum computing. So I had these interview opportunities that had come back to me to speak to them in person or on the phone. I had some written answers from someone else. I got a PR pitch about a home robot. I asked for a review unit. They refused to give it to me, which is a shame because I would have loved to have tried that out just to see how chaotic that would have been. And it goes on and on. Yeah. And so it's again the same sort of thing, summarizing my inbox, trying to tell me what is important and what isn't. So those are kind of the email triage ones. Those are like the behind the scenes, boring, infrastructural bits that we all need to do, but actually we don't particularly like. Then there is the actual process of reporting. And for this one, I use more ChatGPT than Google Gemini, just because Gemini has access to my emails, ChatGPT doesn't. And for this one, this is when I'm using it to try and find potential interviewee sources here, okay? So again, role, you are an expert journalism researcher. Task, your task is to identify and to list potential interviewees based on the brief below. And then what I want it to do and the output, okay? So for each interviewee, provide the full name, their current role, affiliation, why you think they would be a strong fit for the story that I've given you, contact details, etc., etc. Importantly here, you need to give a little bit of guidance as to what you think is important from your output. So first-hand experience, lived experience of this sort of stuff. I want not just established voices, I want underrepresented voices. I want diverse perspectives, both in terms of geography, demography, ideology, gender, all of these different things, to try and bump it out of what it is trained on, which is the internet. And the internet is generally white, male, English language, boring. Yeah, the same sort of thing that we always have relied on in journalism. So that's the prompt. I always ask it to make sure that actually those people do still exist. They are still at their institutions. They're contactable as well. And then I put in a little story brief, which is usually probably a version of the pitch that I've sent to an editor. Might incorporate some summary of their feedback as well, and a little bit of guidance as to where I want it to go. And then the output, this is again an old output because it's ChatGPT 5.1, which is the last but one generation of the AI model that they use. You get things like this, yeah? So their name, their current role or affiliation, a little bit of explanation as to why they're important. If I would scroll down through this, you would see their contact details, etc., etc. Okay. For obvious reasons, that's why I cropped that there. That is the source finder. And then I mentioned the interview summary, and I don't use this one that much, but I use it if I'm trying to dredge up old interviews. And that's really important. So this one is asking it again, you're a journalist researcher to analyze the full interview transcript, pick out the most newsworthy and most journalistically relevant quotes. Again, comes back to Claire's question in the chat. Provide an executive summary of what the person said in bullet points or things like that. For the quotes, you're trying to steer it again a little bit. So this gets us halfway to answering Claire's question in terms of what are the most impactful, revelatory, emotionally resonant, informative statements. Group the quotes thematically if you think, and then just in case you forgot, here is the output that you absolutely need to have, and make sure that you don't reword or summarize or paraphrase any of the quotes. You have to make it what it is. Again, I'm never just going, oh, okay, this person said this, copy and paste into the story, right? It's this person said this. Let me check that they definitely said this in the Otter transcript. And then I'll go, okay, that's useful. So then you attach the Otter transcript to this. You then run it and you get something like this. So this was an interview with a guy called Alex Fazio. There's an executive summary above this, but I just thought I would pick out like the first bit of it. It's trying to summarize the key sections. And that's a way of kind of reading in to the interview that I did maybe 2 weeks ago that I've forgotten about. Again, you can see that it's relatively literal. It has kind of not changed any of the quotes. I mean, I checked it again, but like the double I, that's him stuttering. I normally read papers because I'm looking for like a confirmation of what I'm seeing, those sorts of things. And that is useful to just kind of get across what I have forgotten about effectively. With those prompts, with things like this, by the way, and this is the value unlock that I've realized, and that a lot of people have realized as well, is you can ask AI to generate the prompt. You can ask it to try and identify what would be the best way to elicit what you need from the AI. So I asked it to do this. I said, here is the thing that I want to do. Can you write me a prompt for ChatGPT that would do this? And then it comes up with a version of this. You might have several iterations back and forth, giving a little bit of feedback, but that is the end result. So that's the chatbot stuff. And then just in the last section, we get on to the kind of really new, really shiny, really latest developments, which is the agentic AI usage here. The way that I use AI agents is this. So I use, as I said, Claude Code. So Claude Code is like, the way of thinking about it is you have ChatGPT. If we think about the kind of chatbot version, the simple version, because again, I'm conscious that we're talking to different levels of audience here. Some people will have used AI an awful lot, and again, forgive me if I'm explaining this to you and you already know it, but some people might not, or they might not be certain. You probably all know about ChatGPT. Yeah, that is the interface that you use to interact with a model, an AI model behind the scenes. So when you log on to chatgpt.com, you are typing in a query to ChatGPT, but it is being sent to an AI model that has generally GPT, and then it has a series of numbers after it. At the minute, we're on GPT 5.2. The points show like iterative small developments. Generally, OpenAI and other technology companies, they use full numbers for big steps forward in what they see as their capabilities. So you have the AI product, ChatGPT, and you have the AI model, GPT 5.2, for instance. Agentic AI is similar in this way. You have the product, which is Claude Code. The product, which is Claude Code, the interface that you have between the human and the AI. And you have the underlying model, which would be Opus or Sonnet 4.5 at the minute for Claude, if you bought the Claude version. So you can download Claude Code for free. You generally have to pay for the underlying model if you want to use it at any sort of scale. Claude, the model made by Anthropic, is pretty infamous within AI circles for throttling usage quite low. It's their way of trying to make money effectively. So you use it a little bit, you get a cap on there. It says this far and no further. You have to wait until you can start again using it after usually about 5 hours, their usage resets. That for me as a freelancer is not useful and also is quite expensive. So if I wanted to get a level of usage that I find beneficial for me, I'd probably have to be spending 20, 30, 50, £100 or dollars a month. And that's too much for me. So instead, the way that you can do it is you can kind of use a different model behind the product. So I use Claude Code, but I use a model called GLM 4.7, developed by a company called ZAI. Was initially founded in China, now currently in Singapore. Their data is processed in Singapore. There are lots of other different options that you can utilize. Some are open source models, which means that they are either free or developed using a kind of different process. This costs $36 a year. This is an absolute steal to me. I'm not sponsored by GLM 4.7, although actually I do have I think probably referral codes if you really wanted. So that would get you, I think, a discount that I can use, but I don't actually have that, and I don't know how I would get that. And it might get me some free usage in addition, but whatever. I would just get the $36 a month one because it's dirt cheap, to be honest, for what it is. And that's a really key part of my work process in the last month or so. It's not for doing journalism or asking it questions about my journalism. Instead, it's using it to spin up projects or products that I think can enhance my workflow. So for instance, that daily news briefing, those WhatsApp push notifications, social media listening as well, because you can kind of plug it into different aspects. You can plug it into Reddit, plug it into X, get it to crawl websites and find data for you. All of those are really useful things. Basically, if you've ever dreamed of like an AI product that you think would be useful for you, or generally any product that would be useful for you, you can probably tinker about with Claude Code and get it to work. And it's not that difficult a thing to do. The process is pretty simple to set up. Can also be helped by asking an AI to set it up for you, like a different AI chatbot for some tech support. Help, I've got stuck at this point. What do I need to do? And then it discerns it and explains it for you. Once it's set up, you can ask it questions you can ask a question. Sorry, that's a really bad typo. You can ask it questions in everyday language. It translates it into the kind of computer coding tasks that it needs to do in order to actually carry that out. Then it outputs and saves things down to your computer or your server. So I have instances. Instances here are like versions of Claude Code running on this laptop. I have it also running on my phone at the minute. So you can kind of see I look like an elite hacker, but I'm not actually, but it's just because it's black and green and white text. And what it does is it basically then produces the output that I want, the products or whatever it is that I'm asking it to do. Claude Code has lots of different modes that you can utilize, and I'm thinking about trying to do some sort of guide to Claude Code because it's like slightly more complicated than the average person would want to do, and it takes a lot of time and effort to kind of get a handle on, but it is actually once you do it and get to understand it relatively easy. So it has different modes. One of them is a planning mode, so you can say to it, here's what I want to do. Don't actually start making this thing yet. Plan out how you would do it and then present it back to me so I can give you feedback and we can iterate on that. Or it can spin up agents. So agents are kind of like, and this is where it gets really weirdly matrixy. So you have an AI agent that you're using now. It can control sub-agents, smaller versions of this to go out and do different tasks. And it can run those simultaneously. So let's say that I said, I want to I asked it, for instance, relatively recently to try and build out a list of RSS feeds that would be useful for me. And so I said to it, I want you to spin up one agent that does competitor analysis. So it looks at competing journalists and tries to identify where they might have got their stories from. I also want you to spin up agents that represent journalists on all of these different areas of technology journalism that I cover. And I want you to, as those agents, suggest what RSS feeds you would use as a journalist, and to feed all those back, and the orchestrating agent can then summarize them filter them, decide what's important, and present them back to me as a big old list. So similar to the chatbot prompts, you can ask agents to adopt roles. Like I said, you are a cybersecurity journalist, you are a antitrust tech journalist, you are a business-focused tech journalist, whatever it is you want it to be, you can go out and it helps tailor those prompts a little bit. So the thing that I think AI agents really gives me that has been a massive benefit for me is that I'm not constrained by those chat interfaces. It used to be that I had to ask a question of ChatGPT on a website or in an app, in text, or sometimes with voice. I would then get an output, generally again with text, and I would then have to do something about that. I would have to copy it out, learn what I wanted to do with it, try and move on from there. With Claude Code, what you can do is you can say, here is a folder of files that you can look at and you can save down to. Not your whole computer, that's really bad and really stupid, but here's a specific folder that you can work in. Go wild. Produce the outputs that you think are useful, interrogate the files that you think in this folder are good, and then see what you do. So it allows, for instance, for richer RAG, as I explained. So RAG, that idea of retrieval augmented generation. The example of that is me basically copying the 2,000 or so stories that I'd written over the last 4 years into this folder, saying, here is draft of my journalistic output over the last 4 years. From that, try and discern what I'm interested in. And so what it does is it spawns up a whole load of sub-agents. It goes through them file by file, reads my output, says, okay, he's really interested in antitrust. He's really interested in regulatory changes. He's really interested in the impact of AI on X, Y, and Z. And it tries to summarize that in this way. So it gives me what I call the digital twin prompt, which can then be used in different ways. So it has what it thinks is an identity for me. So you're Chris Stokel-Walker, you're a UK-based freelance technology and culture journalist. You write for different publications. Some of these are correct, by the way. Some of them aren't. So Vice obviously doesn't exist really anymore. I do write for Time. I do write for Wired. I do write for New Scientist and Bloomberg and The Guardian and the iPaper. I have written once or twice for the FT, but I wouldn't necessarily be putting it at the front of my experience. Your expertise sits at the intersection of technology, society, policy, and human impact. Now, there is a risk here that it's a bit like when you get your palm read. You go, oh yeah, this is nailed me. This is exactly who I am, and it's because it's kind of being soporific to you. It's saying this is really useful. This is who you are. You're brilliant. But actually, I think that is a decent summary of what I do. I think that I do work at the intersection of technology, society, policy, and human impact. Then this is my kind of core editorial philosophy according to the analysis of what I did. So I think that every story at its core is a technology story about people, and I think that's true. I generally do ask these sorts of questions. I never treat technology as neutral. It has consequences in its use, both intended and unintended. I think that I would like to think at least that I'm skeptical but fair. So I'm not a cynic, but I am skeptical. I do acknowledge where things are transformative and amazing, as evidenced in the Claude Code talks that I've been giving you just now. I do rigorously examine the risks and downsides. I do try and not be blanket in my condemnation, but I also don't cheerlead. And yeah, I seek what I think is the grey areas. And there's loads of this. This is just the start of this prompt, right? It goes on for quite a while. I'm not going to bore you by psychoanalyzing myself. So I think that's really useful. And actually what I can do is I can then plug that into different things. So last night I said to it, actually the emails that you've been summarizing for me in the morning, like giving me the summary of the stories that you think are important in the last 24 hours, they've not quite been right. So actually, can you refer closer to this prompt of what you think my psyche, my brain is? And then we can use that. Some of you might have heard in the last week about ClaudeBot or OpenClaude. This is the kind of next step on Claude Code where you can interact with it and go wild. give it access to your emails, give it access to your bank, give it access to everything, give it access to your social media, and basically just interact with it through WhatsApp or Discord or whatever. I've seen and spoken to people who have booked tables at restaurants by layering in effectively a kind of text to voice transcription service and a phone number, and then actually getting it to call up restaurants and book tables on their behalf. That's kind of science fiction is now science fact, and it sounds very exciting, very enticing. I don't use that because it seems super risky to me to give up that much of your data, that much of your life to a thing that, as I show here, and I've already reported on, is inherently not always secure. Okay. So Claude bot, it leaked a bunch of personal information in the last few days. Maltbook, which is the kind of Reddit style social network for these Claude bots that you might have seen, they also had their own little data breach, neither of which are good. AI, the keys to your kingdom in terms of the agentic stuff, just beware, I would suggest. But there are ways that you can use it, right? So that daily tech briefing, I think, is really important. So looking through 50 RSS feeds while I'm asleep, scraping the stories from them, the things that have changed overnight, putting them into a database, then applying the digital brain that I have, the digital twin brain, on what I cover and how I cover it, including my general takes on subjects, to try and prioritize what is and isn't important. So it's aggregating, summarizing, then representing that information to me. And it does that generally. I've got a format where I have like the main story of the day and then usually 15 bullet pointed stories. So this is kind of the output that you get. And I hope that you can read that. I know it's kind of like a bit of small text, but basically yesterday it picked out the fact that SpaceX and XAI merged, gave me the sources for various claims in that. So The Verge, Tech Meme, and others. And then it gave me various other stories that it thought I would be interested in. And I basically just skim through those and go, oh, this sounds interesting. Check the source, make sure that actually the summary is accurate, because that's a big concern. And if it is, great. Maybe this is a thing that I will pursue throughout the rest of the day. Maybe I can do a day 2 story on it or something like that. Maybe I have a novel take for an opinion piece or something that can be useful for me. Then I have the push notifications. I kind of showed you very briefly that, but it uses the same digital twin taste that I'm interested in. It checks those RSS feeds every hour that I'm awake, basically. So I generally say from 7 a.m. start and 9 p.m. when I try and clock off. Give me at the top of the hour a scan of those RSS feeds, look at what is new and different and changed since the last hour, then try and score it based on the taste that you know I have, and then send me push notifications when any story gets above a certain level on that kind of grading. So that was what I had a couple of days ago. I've now been talking into the second hour that we've reset because we started at 4, we're now at 5:15. So I now have the 5 p.m. updates that have come through. That goes to my WhatsApp and to my emails. So it's talking about a Wall Street Journal story that is a problem at the minute for Microsoft, and it's basically Copilot is going to pot. You also have an AI and Big Data Expo that has been published by a kind of an industry publication, effectively, which actually I will look at because that could be a useful bit of aggregated stuff. So the push notifications thing, I think, really highlights one of the strengths of Claude Code, which is that it can link together various processes and start to schedule them. So the process basically is as follows. So there's this thing, and this is where you need a little bit of either coding knowledge or kind of like willingness to dabble with the terminology. So there is this thing called a cron job, which is in computers you can schedule an act to take place on your computer. So on my virtual private server, I run a cron job at like 5:30 a.m. to pull down all of the RSS feeds that I have given it and to scan through them and to give it a score based on my digital twin brain, my insights. Then it filters them. So it filters what is important and what isn't. Then it sends it to Claude, in this instance, actually to GLM 4.7, but it assumes that it's Claude for the purposes of being in Claude code, and it summarizes the stories that it thinks are interesting to me. Then what it does is it takes those summaries and it spits them out to me through a third-party integration. So it sends me an email and it sends me a WhatsApp message. The way that you can get to that point is by muddling through with the help of Claude Code. So you can say, I kind of want this to happen. I have these RSS feeds. I want to end up with an email or a text or a WhatsApp message. How do I get there? But it helps if you're able to try and think through the process of how it could work in theory, even if you don't have the technology-based language to do it. And the way that I would equate this is think about when you're doing an FOI request as a journalist. You're often, this is, Ian will be bored of me explaining this in this way now, but like you have to think about the cabinets in which the data are being held and the way that the data is processed to be able to get at it the best possible way. You might not know precisely what that is, but you can kind of guess and analogize what it could be. So the same thing here, like, I didn't know that I needed TextMeBot as a third-party integration, for instance, but I knew that I wanted to get an output through WhatsApp because that's the messaging service that I'm in the most. And if you don't have the best suggestion or the best idea, Claude Code will offer you opportunities to refine that anyway. And there are a whole bunch of different ways that you could utilize all of this stuff. So there are various other tools that I'm thinking about and deploying. Haven't given you all of them because I'll be completely honest, there are some that I want to keep to myself and kind of have as like my little inside edge or something like that. So you have social media listening. See, Claire, I will try and answer your question in the recording so that you can listen to it back later. So you have social media listening. So what's happening on Reddit, what's happening on X, what's happening on Blue Sky, those are relatively easy to spin up. Competitor analysis. Can I say, I need you to track Casey Newton across the internet, basically. Tell me what he is thinking about on that given day. And then what they might be covering next, because that's really what I want, right? Like I want to be at those stories before they are, or many others. Similarly, you've kind of got your idea of trying to find FOIs. Have I missed anything in the news agenda that could be suitable for an FOI? Can you draft me an FOI? And then also business development. So I do, alongside my journalism, I do a lot of training that I'm trying to build out as a business. I don't really have the time to devote to that, building it out a lot. So instead, I outsource it to AI. Can you give me business growth advice? Can you tell me who I should be targeting in terms of marketing while I get on with doing my main job? And that helps quite a lot as well. So the way that I kind of think about it is a bit like a freelance team newsroom. Okay, so I get fed in stuff by robots. It doesn't have ideal taste. It doesn't have its own taste. It is doing cheap imitations of me. It's kind of like the tribute act, as it were. But it feeds into me, and I can then think about actually, is this useful to me? Can it kind of improve and reduce the time that I have to spend on the hard bits and give me the space and the time to do what I think I do best, which is kind of making those linkages, producing analysis, figuring out where the story is going next, and then being able to tell that with the leading experts that I have in my contact book or that I find with the help either of Google or with AI. So the key thing really, though, is that the entire journalism process beyond the research, beyond bringing me stuff, remains within the human. The AI is effectively just the interns or the researchers, and their output with the best will in the world is very much treated like that, with a whole load of skepticism and some uncertainty about how factual, how realistic, how evidenced it is. So you're always checking those sources.